is a shorter version of the talk that I gave last year, so it will be only 20 to 25 minutes, but I try to fit everything in this short time slot. There is one important thing to know. The talk was done last year and some things are changed since that moment, so I will talk about it later. But first, I'll talk a bit about myself. So I'm a senior software engineer at Circle CI, where I'm doing Clojure and Golang, but I also have background in other JVM-based languages like Kotlin, Scala, a bit of Groovy, so like everything. I'm a Google developer expert in Kotlin, and also I have 2 nice cats who get every time more likes than my own articles, but I am not sad. They're funny and so cute. So today we are going to talk about the story that actually happened in my previous workplace. I will tell you what happened, what is arrow meta, how do I decided to choose it, and I will show you some actual code. So today I'm going to talk about a backend project. No front-end, nothing special about it. So like Kotlin, using Ktor, okay, not Spring, but Ktor, and Arrow, that is the library for functional programming. So for deserialization, we used Jackson. Why? Because it was kind of default solution in our department and company itself, and totally nothing wrong with it. It was nice, it was working, but it was not Kotlin first. So why Kotlin first was even important for us? Well, there are a lot of libraries written for Kotlin that are actually wrappers around Java libraries. For example, Makita Kotlin. And we had an interesting experience of chasing null in a non-nullable variable. And it was not so fun as it sounds, which is why we decided to try to select every library as a Kotlin first library. Which is why we decided to try Kotlinx Serialization for serializing our stuff. And yeah, it was Kotlin first. It was really awesome that we had less boilerplate for sealed classes. And yeah, I really liked it. But there were also downsides to that approach. So typical libraries as UUID, for example, from Java and Java Datetime, are lacking serializers out of the box in Kotlinx Serialization. And in general, that isn't like a big problem. We can write our own serializer for UUID, why not? The only thing that we wanted is like not add more boilerplate that we had before. And the most important thing for this talk was the lack of global naming strategy set up in Kotlinx Serialization. So what exactly is a global naming strategy? So in every language, you have some convention. How do you name variables? So for example, on this slide, you can see 2 options. So like uppercase, when the words are glued via underscore, or camel case, when everything is lowercase except for new words. So in Kotlin, we are typically using camel case, but for another project in another language, one may serialize the keys for entries using underscores to separate words, or dashes, like no one will stop you, or even a mix of them. In Jackson, we will solve the problem of renaming the variables using Objectmapper, where we can define the strategy to rename the variables that we'll serialize and deserialize. In this case, this is upper snake case. Can we do something like that in Kotlinx Serialization? Well, globally we can't, for multiple reasons that you can read about in issue 33. One of the reasons is, for example, you have multiple projects that are operating with the same entry, and it's called different in various projects, so you are going to Slack to learn something about it, press Ctrl F, and cannot find anything, because in one project the words are separated via dash, in another via underscore, another uses camel case, and nothing works. Well, you can rename every single field in Kotlinx Serialization. So you just write serial name and desired name above every property that you want to rename after. Well, this works, but I wanted less boilerplate, not more. So I was thinking if there's a good solution for that, because it's just adding repetitively serial name manually, and that means I can do something wrong or write something wrong. Typos happen every time. So I was thinking if I can generate something like that automatically, and actually I can. So for that I used ArenA. ArenA is a ArenA is a functional companion to Kotlin compilers, which allows you to generate code, and using that you can, or like modify the sources even, and you can write your own compiler plugins, linters, other sources transformation. So automatic code refactoring, I think. So like whatever. So how do I came to ArenA? Actually, as I told you, we were using Arrow library for functional programming, and I am a big fan of it. So the choice was not obvious, but I really wanted to try it. And another one important thing about ArenA is that is easier than Kotlin C. Well, you can write something directly using Kotlin C, but it's like really difficult, not a lot of documentation for external users, but you can. And also, I like the approach of ArenA compared to, for example, to KSP, which treats the code as an immutable source. But with ArenA, you can go through the syntax tree and operate with all the kinds of blocks, which I will show you a bit later. So let's jump to the sample project. So if you want to see it yourself on your device, you can also scan the code or like enter manually yourself, but I will do the same right now on my laptop. So let's set up a simpler story. So today we are writing a zoo which has various animals, so like cats and dogs and as data classes. They come from various sources, like third-party services with various standards of documentation, so different naming policies, and we want to deserialize them for sending them to another zoo. So let's see. Yeah, just 1 second. Can I do it? Yeah, it's a bit difficult with the main screen. Can I do it like this? Yeah, just 1 second. I need to remove mirroring of the screen. Yeah, so this is our project. I'll zoom it in a second. Just So as I told you, the setup will be really simple. We have two data classes, which are cat and dog. They have properties like name, age, owner name, and breed. So in ideal scenario, we want to have owner name written not as camel case, but as, for example, snake case. And when we call main function, we will encode our cat and dog and see what happens in a default scenario. So for that, as you can see, owner name is serialized exactly as we set up and called this variable. So let's try to change it. So for a shorter time slot, I prepared an entire project, and we will go step by step through the code that's already written. So the main code is the same. So serializable cat and dog main function, and we are encoding it to string. So typically, as with every library and modification of code, we need to add something to Gradle. So in my case, I'm adding arrow in the main Gradle, and also creating a task to compile the plugin part together with the main one. So as I told you, this talk was been done like in the previous year, and since that time, some parts are already changed. As you can see, I'm using some outdated version of Kotlin stuff, and the problem here is the representation for Kotlin compiler changed in the last version. So right now I'm using the previous version of arrow, and the arrow team has to adjust arrow meta library to represent the changes to Kotlin compiler backend and frontend. So, but I wanted to show you the approach to modifying sources, not only generating code. So also for when we're creating plugin, we need also to import arrow meta and also create a jar. So this is a typical job that you can take from Stack Overflow, for example, as I did. Or there's a better version. Always you can go to the arrow meta repository, and there is a folder with examples that you can use for starting your project, not exactly from scratch, but you can base on the existing one if you have problems with the setup. So let's go to the plugin itself. There is the main part when we override the function called intercept, and here we are listing all the source changes that we will have. So in this case, serial name plugin, but you can, in theory, add more. So for example, you can add another transformation for example, custom annotation and add it afterwards in this list. So then we are going to implement this serial name plugin. We are implementing it as an extension over meta and defining a getter of the desired name. And here, where all the magic begins in meta. So the question is, when we want to transform the sources, at which stage we want to change something. As you can see, there is class declaration, which means we will transform something when we declare a class. But in arrow meta, you can take a lot of other options. So for example, break expression. So when break happens, you can add something. Class body, continue expression, finally, or the entire file. There are multiple options that will fit your case. So for me, it sounded like, well, where do I define a serial name annotation. It's where I declare like the entire class with its property, with its type parameters, with its kind. So I took class declaration. The first parameter is just context, is by default this. Then we are deciding what exactly we are looking for. Well, which fields do we want, which properties we want to rename? All of them or just some? It sounds like we won't only add the annotation serial name for serializable fields, otherwise it just won't make any sense. So there are also various filters. I used annotated with, so I am looking for properties that are annotated with serializable. And then I am writing some kind of transformation. For every class, I'm doing the following. So should I always add a serial name annotation? So we decided that we are doing that only for serializable fields, but also if for some reason we already had serial name, we have to filter it, because otherwise we'll have two annotations with serial name and that won't work out. So I just filter all of them that I don't want and get only that I want to. So the next step is to actually, when we have a property that is defined with all of its contents, we are getting its name and transforming it to the desired case and add it into a string of annotation and then glue them together. So how do I transform a camel case to snake case? Well, that's a good question. I had no idea. I went to Stack Overflow. I saw this beauty. I'm not sure how exactly it works. And I honestly don't want to know how. It just works. I always believe the advices of the random person of the internet is the rule number one for a software engineer. So, and then we're compiling our class declaration back. So we can represent every class declaration as the entire string that is constructed from various blocks. So like typical class looks like annotation, so the kind, like type class or something, data class maybe, name, type parameters, so generics, and our properties. So let's replace the properties with the one that we want, the one that we transformed and added a serial name annotation to them, and actually replace them calling transform replace. So we are just overwriting this part. If we go to the main method back, we can try to run this main and hope it works. And it actually works. Older name is now written using underscore, and it's just as we wanted. So in theory, we can replace it with something else or write into the, I don't know, upper snake case or something, and it will work. So it looks like our theory about adding them works. So let's go back to the conclusions. So yeah, it works. How will it look like in the future? That's the question. So since there are changes in Kotlin, I'm really looking forward for re-implementing arrow meta considering those changes. So like replacing the quote mechanism with something. What was interesting for me, it still requires more knowledge than expected. So not Kotlin C level, but sometimes you have to understand your code more deeply than you may expect it. So like understanding when something happens, or like if you want to do something fancy, it may be not documented well enough still because it's an experimental library, and I really appreciate that it works, and works just fine, so I can do something interesting with it, but still it's in an experimental state. And if you want to do something in a more industry standard level way, I will suggest to use KSP for that. So I was considering using KSP for this task, actually. The problem is KSP, as I told you before, treats the source code as an immutable source. So you can generate new code, but you cannot manipulate the existing one. So you cannot insert annotations inside. One may think that you can think about something, I don't know, generating a custom serializer for every class that is serialized with new serial names. And I think it may work, so it's not as bad as it sounds, but it's, again, more complicated that I would like it to have, and I want less boilerplate and less writing something by myself if I took one library versus another one. So for this project, actually, we decided to stay with Jackson, even if it's not Kotlin first. And why? Because it works. It fits. So why not? But yeah, there are some links that you can read more about ArenA, also the short version of this talk, even shorter than this talk, about writing compiler plugin. And I hope you can try to write something else. And let's see what the next version of ArenA will be. So thank you.